Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome. I'm excited to have Xezene join me again on the show. After our first couple podcasts, this gentleman's knowledge of the expanding universe and what he unpacks for us through the YouTube channel HoloNet and through the subreddit forums is phenomenal. Our conversation today, we touch on a few subjects that are fun, but we really dive into it with the new Jedi Order series, up until Star by Star. That's when the conversation really gets interesting. He also has a big announcement that he shares with us. I know you guys are going to be blown away by this. Again, I want to thank you for your support. It means the world to me. And without further ado, Xezene. I'll kick this off and get rolling here, man. Well, Xezene, it's great to have you back on the show. It's always fun talking with you, my friend.
It's good to be here. Thank you for having me again.
Yes, you have oodles and oodles of knowledge, like I've mentioned to you a lot of times. And going back to some of our previous conversations, which if anyone new checking this out, I would highly suggest that you go listen to them because this gentleman has done his research. He knows his things and he uncovers a lot of lost material that is very useful for the expanded universe with interviews and articles. And it's just wild. So I'm glad that we're doing this again. It's always a pleasure to have you on, and I thank you for taking your time. It means a lot, man.
Oh, yeah. No, it's my pleasure. I mean, I was glad to say yes to show up again.
Yeah, it's always fun. Now it's been probably 6 7 months since we did one of these. I know we talk off stream, but the last time you had mentioned you were going to see The Return of the Jedi in the theaters.
Yeah.
So how was that experience?
Ooh, I would love to tell you that it was amazing, but it was less than amazing. I loved seeing it, but it was a packed house, and the whole row behind me were full of kind of these middle-aged guys who felt that it was. I guess they thought it was the right thing to do to poke fun at every single scene. So that was not the greatest. However, with that said, the movie was so good that it still overpowered some of that. So even though it wasn't a pure experience that I was hoping for, it was still great. I have to tell you, I loved seeing those space scenes on the big screen. And, with the screen that big, you can really see the B Wing.
Yeah, yeah, coming at you.
Right. I mean, those things disappear in the real movie, but if you see it so big projected like that, it's great. Not so. I mean, I enjoyed it, but that's the risk you take when you go out with people you don't know. So
Yeah, unfortunately, that's kind of what it is now. Kids going there being goofy and on their phones, and it's been a long time since I've been to a theater. And we can all buy. I mean, I'm sure a lot of us have bigger screen televisions now, but like you mentioned, there's nothing as a theater experience with the sounds all around you. I can just imagine just that feeling because the last Star Wars movie really that I saw in theaters was Revenge of the Sith, and that was a long time ago. So, like, obviously, memories fade over time in that experience, but I haven't been back to a movie theater in years, to be honest with you.
yeah, I was just thinking to myself when I went there at the time. I said to my friend, it would be so great for them to show the prequels again. And I think there were a couple theaters that did not around here. But then I thought to myself later, I thought, well, maybe it wouldn't because I love the prequels and I fear that if they re-release them in theaters, you would have people rolling in the aisles because of the memes, which is really not how I watch those movies. I don't
No,
watch them with a comedic angle.
no,
So
right.
yeah.
They are clever with the memes, though. I will give them
They
that.
are. I mean, some of them are funny for sure.
Yeah. And actually, I take that back. The Solo movie was the last Star Wars movie I saw in theaters. I just thought I
Oh,
went with
right.
my good friend Spencer and I went, and it was actually a great experience because it was weeks after it was already released, so there was barely anybody in there. So we got to right in the center section, perfect view, no rubbish going on around us.
Hey, that's nice.
Um, Last time, also, you mentioned, and it caught my attention because there's so much when I was listening to it. It's like, why didn't I pick up on that? Why I can't believe this. But you dabble with music and you sing, correct?
That's true. Yeah, I do. Yep. I I do. I've played live a couple times. I would like to be in a band, but um, that depends on a lot of things. So it's
Yeah,
not
yeah.
as easy just waking up one day and going, "I'm in a band." So yeah, I mean, but yeah, I love music and love singing and playing guitar. I think I've done both. I've played and sung for, I think at this point it's been maybe 12, 13 years. So that's
Wow,
good.
nice. That's great, man. And guitar is quite a skill to learn. I dabbled with it a little bit myself. I can hold a little bit of a tune. I wouldn't call myself a musician, but it's very interesting how, depending on how you tune your guitar, the chords, what level, there's like all this different stuff that you can do with it to make it sound different. And also, have you like uploaded anything? I know there's a lot of different outlets out there now for people to like upload sample tracks and maybe collaborate via over the internet. Has that ever crossed your mind on something that you want to dabble with?
I have. It's been a while. I had a YouTube channel where it was a private one where I ended up putting up covers and such when I was developing my talent. And then I haven't done that for a long time. And then another one I haven't touched for a long time, but it is out there if anyone wants to find it, is I have a SoundCloud, which I think I put on some music. The last thing I had put on there was probably, yeah, good 10 years ago, but it was
Yeah.
something where that was a lot. I mean, when you're a one man operation, you do everything, and that it can take a lot. It's good, but if you do the guitar and the vocals and the drums and the production, then I like to collaborate more than. I mean, there are some things I do by myself, but when it comes to music, I really like to be with other people. I don't mind to perform alone,
Yeah.
if it's like a cover. But if I'm trying to come up with ideas, I love the experience of being in a room with someone else and going, "Hey, do that again."
Yeah. No, you're right. That makes it fun for one.
Yeah,
And then you
and
can
people
kind of
come up with stuff I don't come up with.
yeah, exactly. You can learn off of each other and kind of the sound. When I learned to play the drums a little bit, the guy that I learned was playing, he basically self-taught himself. He was a phenomenal drummer. He really loved jazz music. So like jazz drumming, if you're familiar with drumming, is like very technical.
Oh yeah, oh
It's
yeah.
like very tedious, technical offbeats and rhythms and he would call up some members that he used to play with and they'd come over and they'd play on the guitar while he was teaching me and try to have me kind of keep a beat to what, if we're playing quarter notes or 16th note rhythms or whatever. It was a lot of fun. It was yeah,
That's
unfortunately
cool.
he passed away of cancer in the mid 2000s. But yeah, my dad actually played with him when my dad was a singer in a band too,
Wow,
back
that's
in
awesome.
yeah, back in the day. So it was cool to my dad worked with him and then he taught me how to play some. And I actually have
That's
some
cool.
recordings on CD somewhere still. So yeah.
That's awesome. And a person can make an impact like that. I mean, life is so short. You just try to have these moments while you can have them. And so, even though he's gone, it's cool that he was able to contribute that and have a little effect on your dad and you. And I think I used to, when I was growing up, I played viola in the orchestra, and I
Mm,
loved being part of the orchestra and playing. As something larger than myself. So I think it's still like that. I mean, I don't mind working alone, but partnerships and working in a larger thing. It's always cool if you play in a band or orchestra or jazz or whatever. It's a crazy experience on, as I would say, game day when you're there doing the concert where of course you're nervous as all get out. You don't want to screw up, but there comes a point in the performance where you're playing and then everything else is doing its thing. And it's almost like you're a wave on the ocean and the rest of the ocean is doing all the right stuff and you're not doing anything, but somehow you're also doing that. Everybody is somehow making something that ends up being larger than their individual selves. And maybe that's a good
mm,
tie into NJO. That's why I think
yeah.
NJO is so cool. Yeah.
Yeah. But perfect segue. But yeah, honestly, because now in our previous conversations, we talked a lot about NJO because for me going on this journey, as you know, everyone talks about that. It's either, if it's not, it's one of the best, if not the best series from what I've been told is the new Jedi Order. And now I'm currently reading through it with some friends, and we just finished Star by Star. I finished it yesterday morning, and they finished it Friday or Thursday. And we actually got together today for a book club, and we talked about it for a little while earlier this morning. And man, that book is insane.
Yeah.
Like we couldn't put it down. Like we all had the same vibe. It's like the chapter after chapter. You know, some books there's always like a little lull, right? There's a few chapters that are like just kind of in there. But this thing was just like it kept you wanting to go to the next chapter.
Oh yeah. So you've been enjoying the series.
Yeah. Yes. It started off incredible. And I mean, unfortunately, I knew some of the spoilers just because the series has been out now for a long time. The earlier, late 90s, early 2000s. So Chewbacca was a big thing I already knew about. Um, so Vector Prime was, but I didn't know how he died. I didn't
Mm,
know the planet situation. So I just knew he died. So that was interesting to read that. They had no idea, and I didn't spoil it for them. So that was cool to get their reaction. And then Michael Stackpole's books were good. I had a little bit of an issue, honestly, with the James Luceno's duology there. I
hmm
just, I just that one was kind of like I don't want to say I was let down per se because his other novels are fantastic, but I didn't have that fire for me
Yeah.
like other ones that he's wrote. And then Kathy Tyer's book picked up with Balance Point. Greg Key's books were phenomenal.
Oh yeah.
Oh my word! I think I mentioned that to you when we were talking at a previous time. But Star by Star was just like to me, it felt like I'm going to reference here to the Lord of the Rings, but it felt like the Two Towers. So all this buildup and commotion and this big battle happened, and now it's like okay, it's like not over yet.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm
Yeah.
trying to
Yeah.
say
Yeah.
there? It
Yeah.
it was just an immense amount of stuff happening, and there was characters dying. I mean, I don't want to try to spoil things for anyone that has not read it yet, because there are still people out there that are like me that are still learning about the expanded universe and haven't read through it. But in Troy Denning, that's the first novel I read by Troy Denning too.
hmm
So A+.
Yeah. I was a huge fan of Star by Star when I read it. Granted, it's been a long time, but yeah, I think what you said is right. The funny thing is, I would recommend the series for everyone, but I think virtually no matter who you ask, you are going to find in pretty much everybody who reads it that there are a couple books for whom for them are not uh like their favorite. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean they hate them,
Right.
but when you have a 19 book series with so many different authors, you kind of have that happen. For me, that was more like the Force Heretic situation. But it really depends on a writer or like a reader's preferences. I mean, I know a couple of people who love Force Heretic most out of the whole series. So I mean, but yeah, I mean, Conquest for me, Greg Key's. Of course, I was interested in the whole series, but that was a really special book to me. I think, Vua Rapung is an incredible character, and I really favorite Yuuzhan Vong character. And there's him and there's Anakin, and that whole story, um, I felt that reinvigorated the series and added a lot of depth to the Yuuzhan Vong society. It's at that point that we really start to see all these layers. At first, the Yuuzhan Vong idea, when you pitch it to someone, it might sound kind of hokey. Oh, these extra galactic guys are so powerful, blah, 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 blah. They say, oh, come on. That sounds like it's from Dragon Ball or something like this, crazy power fantasy. But as you get into the series, especially with Conquest and onwards, you see there's the Shapers, there's the Shamed Ones, there's these levels, and this is a really rich and complicated society. Um, and it seems from the outside like they have a unified belief system, but actually they don't. And there's all these different things that are really cool. So, of course, let's see, Star by Star's ninth book, I think. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so you're pretty much halfway. It's crazy for me to say that because in recollection, Star by Star feels like it's past the halfway point, but I guess it is the halfway point. Um, but yeah, I have said before when talking with friends about it, and maybe a post here and there, is I can't, since you haven't read past Star by Star, I won't reveal everything, but I, in retrospect, feel like Star by Star, in my own parlance, I think that's when NJO grew its dark little angel wings and started to really fly, because that book, when I read that, and I guess, you said you didn't want to spoil too much, so I'll try to keep it a bit vague, but when I read that book, that was really the first time in any of the Star Wars reading experience where I thought, okay, how are we going to win? How are we going to get out of this? Because I mean, that all the other Star Wars books that go, okay, I mean, we know what's going to happen. They're
Yeah.
going to take care of the bad guy. But you read Star by Star and you're like, seriously, how though? Because now you've lost the most important battleground. You've lost the person that you thought was going to turn this thing around. So then, you're just like, what do we do? I mean, what, like, so it's at that point I really started to feel real dread. And I think that's the series plays with this thing. I was just listening to an interview with Walter John Williams where he talks about this. The series, there's a trope called the false protagonist trope, where a series will set someone up as if they are the protagonist, but they are not the protagonist. They are going to be cut down, or they're going to fail, or they're going to fall. And that is what NJO does. But it's kind of a risky thing if you're doing such a long series, because it means that you have to hope people will keep coming back after they've had their hopes crushed. And so thankfully that did happen with NJO. It stayed successful. But I think I commend them for the guts of that decision. And in my opinion, Star by Star, the maturity started with Conquest, and you could say with Vector Prime, but Star by Star is really where the maturity, in my opinion, really hits, because, that bubble of invincibility that they kind of bring up sometimes
Yeah.
with Chewie being popped. Well, now it's like really popped. And for anyone who's been through tough stuff in life, which when I read this series, I was going through that myself at the time. Life throws you curveballs that you didn't plan on. You lose things or people that you didn't expect to. And so whenever a series or a book or a movie does that, it feels very real to me. Like, this is real. And now the question is, how do our heroes deal with that? How do our characters respond to that type of story? It makes it very real. And I think it's impossible to get a book like Traitor without a book like Star by Star. You have to have Star by Star in order to have a book like Traitor. There's no way you could just jump from Vector Prime to Traitor.
Yeah. I haven't. I'm excited to get there. You don't know how excited I am to get to Traitor. We'll have to have another conversation after I get done with that one. But you're absolutely right. I I guess we could talk spoilers a little bit since I'm up. I don't want to really do it for me after Star by Star, because honestly I didn't. So cover your ears. But we lost Anakin in Star by Star.
Yeah.
Now, just the other day I was having a conversation with a friend, and he threw that out there, and I didn't know about it. I truly didn't know about it. I wasn't mad. I let him continue on. And honestly, I was like, shit. Pardon my French, but I was like, damn. I didn't know that.
Really.
And now I'm like, okay, when's this gonna happen now? And
Right.
it happened, honestly, a few chapters after our phone conversation that we were having.
Wow.
When I read it. Yeah. So I was like, oh, okay. But the way that he went out was amazing. Like, the way that Troy Denning captured that and explained that, with him just glowing and he just making this sacrifice for the better good. And like, to me, I felt he knew there wasn't much left to him. Like, he had to do this for the rest to continue on. That's what I felt.
Yeah. He well, my opinion here, but I think I think it's a pretty solid case. I think he saved the Jedi Order, because if the Voxen are allowed to continue, we've already down. I don't know how few Jedi are left, but it's rough.
Yeah,
So
they took out.
yeah, I think Anakin, he's battling injuries the whole time, and they're really going into the belly of the whale, and he commits to that, and he goes out as a hero. I would like to underline one thing now. Listen, I won't spoil anything about what happens for him, but
Okay.
presumably that Jacen survives his book.
Yeah.
But when I read Star by Star, and maybe a lot of people like me, I read it maybe a couple years after release date, but I didn't. I wasn't following outside, just picking up at the bookstore, so wasn't involved in the fan community,
Okay.
and so I read it in a vacuum, and probably a lot of other people read Star by Star, and then they take Jacen. You're like, oh, well, and I won't reveal too much. Okay, I'm trying not to reveal too much, but
Appreciate that.
let's just say the series had me thinking for a little while that this guy was gone. And when he showed up again in Traitor, my socks were blown off. I was like,
Really?
what? He's alive. And so, I mean, that, they do these things with the series, which nowadays it might lose a little bit of effect because people know that he's alive. But at the time, I didn't. So I remember looking at the cover of Traitor and going, who's this guy? This looks a lot like Jacen.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, I mean, there's a great line that kind of is a little bit of foreshadowing, and it's in Star by Star, so no spoilers, where Vergere, when she's talking with Jacen, she leans down and she cries some tears, and she says something to the effect of, these tears are for what I know you're going to have to go through.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Your almost pretty spot on.
Yeah, and I think from what I remember from the backstory, Denning was finishing Star by Star. He had to rewrite like half that book because the way that the publishing was being done, Balance Point was like got finished being written as he's writing Star by Star, and most of it's already been written, and so he had to go back reading Balance Point. Like, wait, this is a little different than I thought. So he had to rewrite a lot of Star by Star. I know Denning said he had a lot. He said in an interview that he had a lot of natural tendencies that he likes to do as a writer, but because Star by Star was his first big time Star Wars book, he policed himself to
a
try to
level.
Yeah, he tried to sort of contain what his natural tendencies might take him to suggest. He didn't suggest certain directions, so he tried to stay on the straight and narrow for Star by Star. But he said that he's finishing Star by Star and he's writing it, and he's emailing all these authors, and then he's talking with Matt Stover, who's doing Traitor, and it's like being written simultaneously. And it's getting pretty close to like that stuff with Vergere and stuff towards the end. And he's messaging Stover going, so what do you want me to do with this? And Stover's like, I don't know. Give me a couple days. And then he's like, I got to know. And Stover's like, could you do this? And then a little while later, Stover's like, actually, no, do this. And Denny's like, are you sure? Because this thing is going right to the press. And I think at the last second, anybody who knows anything about Stover knows that he's a little bit late to the punch when delivering his books. Sometimes he misses deadlines. I think Traitor was the last one on deadline, but he did send Denning like at the last 11th hour what he was going to do with Traitor, and so Denning's like, okay, I'll write that in. So
interesting. I was
because the characterization of Vergere hangs a lot on what Traitor's going to do.
Okay, she's interesting as heck.
Oh yeah,
very interesting. We were talking about her quite a bit.
She's like, the character was someone that Luceno invented as a Jedi from the old days. If you've read Rogue Planet,
Yes, I have.
And she's I think Vergere comes from a French word which Luceno took, and I think it means garden or something like that. It's like a garden, and yeah, she's a cool. I won't talk about Traitor, but I will say this is an exciting thing. LegendsCon, I wasn't able to go, but I had a person that I know who went, and I had one question I wanted to ask Stover, and I asked him, could you please ask this for me? And the question that I had was, the more I thought about it, the more I thought that Vergere, even though Stover didn't invent her, Luceno did, that maybe Stover would know if Vergere was intended to be like a Phoenix archetype, because she fits a lot of similar
Mm,
elements of a Phoenix. She has healing tears. She has she seems to be gone and then come back. It's like
yeah.
this reincarnation thing. She has the rainbow feathers, and there's a lot of things.
That's
And it gets
interesting.
even more specific than that. I won't say because spoilers,
Yeah, yeah.
uh, but yeah, and I asked, I through this person I asked, and apparently, the answer that Stover said was, "Yeah, I think so." So it was pretty cool.
Cool. Yeah, I wish I could have went to that event, man. It sounds everyone that I've spoken with so far speaks highly of it. The crew that put that together did a great job. It sounds like it would have it was a blast. Not that it sounds like a blast if I would have been able to go.
Same,
But
same.
unfortunately I didn't, and I get to live through it through all the wonderful people that share everything, and friends of mine that have made doing this. So it's I'm glad that we have this for others that don't get to go to attend them kind of events.
Yeah, I know some of the things were recorded by people in the audience, and then they
Yeah.
officially recorded certain panels that will be released in the future.
Yeah. I would like to talk to Mr. Denning, just so you know,
Oh
because
yeah, he seems
this
like a really nice person. I mean, I haven't gone through so many interviews. Uh, he's always very forthcoming. He seems very courteous, very collaborative. You know, I think he's over criticized in terms of like I'll put it this way. Denning, he did come up with a lot of ideas that people, including myself, would criticize. I don't agree with him about the way he envisioned the future after the new Jedi Order. But with that
yeah.
said, that wasn't all Denning's choice. There's a lot of things that he wanted to do or didn't want to do that the editors in the series of those series, they went in a different direction that wasn't necessarily Denning's choice.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm gonna get back to that because that's something I was gonna ask you. But you meant on Vergere, you mentioned Luceno created her. Now, from
Mm-hmm.
Rogue Planet's Greg Bear's book, right?
That's right. Yeah.
But so he must have had some communication, or did he
Yeah. He
reach
sat down with Greg Bear and kind of said, "Hey, do you think you could do this for me?" And so then they
Mm,
sat down and worked out this whole thing with Vergere. But that was all Luceno's thing. And Vergere was invented for the NJO, but NJO is being developed in like 1998.
yeah, yeah,
So it's before Rogue Planet exists.
yeah.
So
That's
yeah,
pretty.
it's interesting. I've looked a little bit into Rogue Planet's development, and there's not too much there, but it is interesting. I mean, I know that Greg Bear was told. I don't know if this was from George or just from Lucy or whatever, but you can do anything, but can't feature the droids and don't feature Padme. George has got his own plans, so stay
We're
away.
off limits.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I forget sometimes while I'm reading through this that some books were out before others, or things like it just I don't know, just how the operating order, but they read like a flow.
Yeah, they worked so hard. I mean, Denning himself has said that he thinks that uh, the number of words in the emails that they exchanged, the number of emails that they exchanged throughout the NJO was more than the published words of the entire series. It's just to collaborate. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, jumping back to that, now do you know? I know you've done a lot of research, but how did they come up with this collaboration of authors for this project? Like, I know we've touched on certain things throughout our conversations over time, but like, was there did somebody say, "Hey, I got a list of authors here on this board. This is who I want to work on this."
You've asked a very interesting question. I've never been asked that, and I think I think it's pretty interesting answer. So, um, all right. Well, I will answer your question, and then afterwards, I'll also tie this into something that an announcement I guess I have to make, which this
Ooh,
some of the stuff that you just asked will be in that. So the answer
ooh,
to that is when Lucy Wilson was in, I think she was at a con, like a convention. It may have been San Diego Comic Con or something. But she was there, and I don't know the year. It might have been 97, might have been 98, but probably 97. She's there, and she's there with Kevin J. Anderson. And Kevin J. Anderson is there with a couple other authors, and they're just talking about, wouldn't it be interesting? Because, Kevin's this guy who he organizes all the Tales stories, and he's doing all this stuff to organize all those authors for that. And it's not really collaborative because they don't really, not making one giant story. They're just making a lot of different stories in the same book. But so to me, it makes sense. Kevin was the most collaborative. He worked with Tom Veitch, and that was even across comics and novels. So it makes sense that he would think of this, but it was really Kevin's idea. So Kevin suggested to Lucy while they're there, hey, don't you think it would be interesting if we did a multi-book series? And I don't know if he was talking Star Wars per se, but just saying in general, wouldn't it be interesting to do a huge effort, but you coordinate it all, and it's all different authors, and that got Lucy thinking. Lucy Wilson, she was going, and so that idea really came from Kevin, and then Lucy's the one that suggested, connected it with Star Wars. I think Kevin did have an idea of his own, which is interesting. In that situation, I think it would have been invaders. Like they would have these giant ships, and they'd be like coming out from the inside of gas planets, and they wouldn't be coming from outside the galaxy. They'd be somehow lurking in these gas giants. That's interesting, but I don't think he ever had the chance to pitch that idea to Lucy. So Lucy takes that idea, then goes, runs off, and at that time, she was thinking to herself, the Bantam sales had been down. Star Wars books weren't selling as well as they used to. So she really wanted to work with Shelley Shapiro, who was one of the most famous editors that, she just really wanted to work with her. And she was at Del Rey. So in order to make that work, Lucasfilm would have had to renegotiate its contract, which they did. And there was this huge bidding war between Del Rey and Bantam for who was going to keep going. And Bantam did have plans for the future, but it wouldn't have been any different than what we already were getting. Whereas Del Rey, there was this big idea, we're going to do something big. So Del Rey won that. Funny thing is, like, eventually they're in the same company, so it kind of doesn't matter. But Del Rey won that, and then Lucy was the one who chose all the authors. I think it was Lucy and Shelley, I should say, because Shelley's at Del Rey. So sometimes Shelley would know some author at Del Rey, and Lucy would talk about it. Lucy had chosen Tim, Zahn, and Cam Kennedy and all this. Like, she had advocated and chosen all these people, Kevin Anderson. So I think Lucy said that she chose the authors of NJO specifically for the book that they're writing. So like Stover was chosen to write Traitor. Now I should say, asterisk, Traitor's none of the books are like they had it mapped out and they knew what they would write, but they had an idea of what it would be like, and then that was how they chose the author. Like, it's kind of like they had a tone they were going for. So like Elaine Cunningham was chosen for Jaina because they thought that she could capture the young woman's perspective really well. So they did this whole way, Lucy did, and then they plotted with all the authors. And then there are a couple authors that turned the series down, that didn't do it. Timothy Zahn's probably the most famous one. He turned NJO down. He was offered to do it. Tim helped come up with the idea for the Invaders with Stackpole, but he turned it down. The reason that Tim said he turned it down was because, he thought about it a lot. I have also thought about it, about what he was asked to do. Probably, I suspect it's Force Heretic, but I don't know. All I know is Tim has said it was a duology or a trilogy. But I think that, Zahn says the reason he turned it down is he just didn't want to work on somebody else's outline. He would have been fine to do his own story, but he didn't want to have to follow somebody else's outline. Because I guess Zahn said, sometimes he liked to change things at the last second, and he wouldn't have been able to do that without screwing everybody else up in NJO. So that, he took himself out of contention, and then after that, they didn't ask him for another series. But okay, with that said, as for an announcement, which I guess I'll make here, I was considering whether to say this, where I would say this, but I'll probably put a teaser up the next couple of weeks about this. But some of the information I just talked about it's from me, but you can hear it from the horse's mouth. So I have a documentary that I've been working on for the last year or so for the new Jedi Order. It's an archival documentary. Now, this is a big sucker. I have no idea how large it's going to be, but I can tell you that it is certainly going to be more than 3 hours. It's probably going to be 4 or 5 or 6. I mean, it's something that's a lot. Now, I should clarify, just so everybody's clear about this. It's an archival documentary. So archival as in there's no voiceover, there's no narration. These are all clips taken from everybody connected from NJO. So all of the authors, every single one. There, even Michael Jan Friedman, who wrote Nightfall, he's in there. That was a canceled series. Timothy Zahn, as I mentioned, Kevin, everybody that you can imagine, short of George, is involved in the series. I did consider whether to throw in a couple of George quotes, but now it's going to just focus on the publishing. And, I hope that it can be interesting for people. It's obviously there's discussion of every character you can imagine. So if you want to hear your a favorite author or someone talk about Jacen, you're going to be able to hear that, or Leia or Ganner or whoever. And so but what I like is they don't just talk about the development, they talk about the behind the scenes, but they also talk about the depth, the meaning. So there's some times where, Stackpole or Stover or someone, they'll be talking real in depth about the Force or some deep stuff, or Walter John Williams talking about the government. And so it's really interesting. And I think that whole thing, it will certainly come out in 2024. I'm aiming towards the beginning. Maybe, obviously it'll stand on its own as an archival documentary, but I'm hoping it can also serve as a resource that if anyone in the future wants to make like a 45-minute narrated documentary, they can use this archival documentary as a resource to say, okay, here's all the clips. We can take whatever we want from this. We can learn whatever we want from this. It's kind of like an accompaniment to reading the book. So you read the whole series, listen to the thing. And I think, I just thought to myself, the prequels have hours and hours and hours of behind the scenes and interviews and original trilogy, but there's nothing like that for NJO. And I don't think that's fair, because NJO deserves that kind of treatment. So I look forward to that. So that'll be coming out next year. It's the whole thing. It'll be on YouTube. I might also put it on archive.org. And then there will be a postscript. It's not part of the documentary, but I will put, because I debated where to put this stuff, on the issue of New Jedi Order and Legacy of the Force and how they collide. There will be, I'm guessing, maybe a half hour, 45-minute thing after, like a video after, which will be interviews with the NJO authors about what they thought about the directions afterwards. And so you're going to just have it all. Right. So this is for history, for posterity, my gift. So, yeah.
Man, that's wild. I can't believe it's 6 hours.
It's long. Maybe. I have no idea. It's long. You can listen to it in the car.
Wow. So I can just imagine what it was like for you going through this, because I know this is one of the reasons why you started to get involved so heavily with the research and uncovering things, is because of NJO, because it's a personal meaning to you.
Yeah, it is. And, funny thing is, I would have never expected I'd do a whole full-blown documentary. But what happened was I'd be going through these clips, finding little things that were interesting. And then I found more by different authors. And then at some point, I don't think it was hubris at this point, but I thought to myself, could I get them all? A little Pokemon thought. Could I catch them all? And so I eventually did. The hardest one to track down was from Kathy Tyers. She has only given one. I think recently she gave her second, but up to that point only had given one audio interview on Star Wars ever. And I had to contact. I sent some emails around to the creator of the first Star Wars podcast, which I think was Jedi Talk, in 1999. And I messaged him saying, hey, would you happen to have any of these 25-year-old files
laying around?
And eventually, in his garage, rescued from an old hard drive, those things are being resurrected. So
that's
to
awesome.
me, it's gold. So it's like, thank you, sir.
100%.
Yeah. So I mean, it'll all be there, and the cool thing is, like I said, you get to hear people talk in depth. It's always fun hearing this. So a lot of my work, first you collect the thing, but then the work is I want to be efficient with this. So even though it's long, I still want it to be efficient. So I'm gonna I just finished this process where I go through every interview, every author, and I cut it down into the clips, into separate clips on separate subjects so that I can recombine it without any fluff in between about any nonsense. So you can just have the meat for the whole time. It'll just be a feast and people being gorged in Star Wars. But I think it's cool. Sometimes even I discover things just editing it right now where you've got Elaine Cunningham talking about how she sees Jag and Jaina, and then you've got Aaron Alston talking about how he sees Jag and Jaina, and then it's really cool when they like line up and they're saying the same thing. You're like, oh, yeah, cool.
That's
So
that's awesome. Well, thank you so much for breaking that news on the channel here. That's
yeah, oh yeah,
appreciate that. So that's awesome. I'm excited to hear this now. I know you have little bits and pieces of things that we can find on your Reddit page that you put together, but nothing along the lines of this, man.
yeah. I don't think something like this does exist in the history for the EU. So I hope that it can be something special. I mean, I know there are people who have done. There was a great documentary someone did on Shadows of the Empire. That was great. But yeah, I think hopefully this will be something that can last. And I have another big project, actually bigger than this, but I won't reveal that one yet. But this one is, I think it'll be cool little thing.
Yeah, I I'm sure it's gonna. A lot of people are gonna appreciate this, especially how much love there is for the series. Like I mentioned earlier, if it's one of, if not the most favorite series that people enjoy. I know Fate and Legacy. I haven't got there yet, but I've heard good things about them, which we'll talk about here in a little bit. Because I mentioned you mentioned that they went a different direction in some of the authors, but Lucy Wilson, you mentioned earlier, like I spoke to her a little bit.
Whoa,
Yeah,
cool! I've never
yeah,
done that.
yeah.
I would be starstruck.
Through email, not like this,
Sure,
but
sure.
very genuine, nice woman. Um, she's not up for doing interviews because I wanted to talk about her because in some of our other streams, like her name is brought up so much because she made a lot of big moves that made things very successful and made things happen.
Yeah, she's always loved working behind the scenes without the spotlight.
Yeah,
And that's so awesome. And yeah, there will be some Lucy clips in this thing. I think we are lucky that she was the one that led. I mean, you can't ask for more than that, right? She's the copy
no,
editor, or she writes. She types up the manuscript to A New Hope. I mean, the like the shooting script. And so, I mean, it's to have that person be leading the NJO, leading the EU, really the whole '90s thing.
yeah,
It was kind of a tragic situation where she was one of the reasons we got the Shadows of the Empire soundtrack, which is awesome. But then she had found out that John Williams wasn't too happy about that, so that kind of killed that initiative. There weren't going to be any more. But she had wanted to do one of the Thrawn trilogy, and I can't tell you how much I would have loved a
oh, that would
CD
have been cool.
of. I know that there has been of like a fan who is also a professional composer who did a couple of themes, composed, and then they had a full scale orchestra doing these themes for the Thrawn trilogy. That was really cool.
Really?
But yeah, I think I'm probably going to butcher his name, Arturo Des Boscovich or something like that. But he's in Spain, Spanish composer. But that's really cool. But with that said, still not the same as like getting a full CD treatment.
Score.
That would have been
Yeah.
really cool. That's something else. Just a side note. One other thing I hope this documentary can do, and it's one of the things I've been hoping my infographics can do, is we just put to rest certain myths that have outlived their time. Certain myths about the EU that aren't true, things that are false. That we just get the truth out there, and that'll be that. So the NJO unfortunately does have a fair number of myths about it. People who say certain things, like for instance, Timothy Zahn having nothing to do with the series or him hating it. It's not true. Other people have other myths. Probably the most famous myth is the idea that George personally told them to kill Anakin. It didn't happen. So, I mean, George was involved in the series, certainly in the documentary will talk about the ways in which he was involved, but not like that. That's George never, ever in the history of the EU, he never told them to kill a character. He sometimes told them to save a character, but he never told them to kill a character. Never.
Yeah. That's man, that's exciting. I'm excited. And it'll be great for me, well, for everyone, but currently reading the books and finishing
Yeah.
and then watching that or listening to it. That'll be so insightful because I have questions now. I have more questions that
Yeah.
hopefully will be answered as I read through. But that was one that came to mind that I originally asked you there is like, how did they pick all these fantastic authors to do this? Because like you mentioned Elaine Cunningham, like she hasn't really done a whole lot in the Star Wars universe. Greg Keyes, I mean, he's done 3 books and he did some, I believe, some gamer, maybe hyperspace, little short stories, if I'm
Yeah.
not mistaken. And they're the way that they write is very good. So it's like after that, leading into my next question, did some of these authors pull away from the direction that they wanted to go after NJO?
Well, I can say within NJO, there was a case of that a little bit where Stackpole has said, he was part of the original team to write NJO, one of the original teams to come up with the whole idea with Luceno and all the guys. And they decided to kill Anakin early, but he didn't want to. He was against that decision. He stayed against that decision the whole time. He has said before that I think he envisioned a future for Anakin, which would have, I guess, some people have said it sounds kind of like Cade, but he would have been kind of, I don't know, joining a riffraff ragtag a gang of smugglers and pirates and all these people, and he would be going off saving the day in different ways with these guys. I mean, it's okay. I don't necessarily think it's as impactful as what they did do, so I prefer what they did do, even though it's painful. But Stackpole, that he was on board, but I think he said when he was writing Dark Tide, one of the reasons he tried to give Anakin so much characterization, he was hoping it would change their mind. He was hoping that maybe they would not kill him. Of course, it didn't happen. So that's one situation within the series where there was a person with a different vision. I mean, he didn't like rage quit about it. He still loves NJO. But Stackpole, he didn't. I don't know. Some of the authors didn't keep up. I don't think he read the other books. A lot of the other authors did. I know Salvatore did, and a lot of the other authors did read the following books. As for the following series, well, I mean, Elaine Cunningham has spoken about how she did read Dark Nest and Legacy of the Force and didn't like it. So I think that sometimes, but she was still signed on to write a book, Blood Oath, which took place after Legacy of the Force. So, these authors, they look at it, but they can have their opinions, but they're also professionals. It's the same thing with James Luceno, where he wasn't loving what they were going to do. He was Luceno was invited to the meetings for Legacy of the Force and Fate of the Jedi, but he was there just kind of as an advisor. He wasn't really driving that series development. So, even though he has spoken publicly about how it wasn't his plan for things to turn out this way, and Stover has even been more direct, and Stover's just said, I think they asked him, and he said, that's the worst effing idea I ever heard, stuff like that. So he was really upset about it, and he said he wouldn't be interested in writing in that era due to that. But, Luceno, even though he was so critical, he still did write Millennium Falcon, which takes place later. So, a lot of the authors, they might have their view, but if Lucasfilm comes to you and says they want a book, it's hard to say no. I mean, Aaron Alston was an author for NJO. He had a vision of a different outcome after NJO, but they asked him if he'd like to write Legacy of the Force, and he said sure. So I mean, sometimes you get offers, and a lot of these guys are willing to play ball with stuff, even if it's not what they want. I mean, Timothy Zahn's probably the most famous example where he wanted to do like a road trip story with Mara and Luke and Ben. And obviously, that's pretty impossible considering some of the stuff that happens. So yeah, I mean, there are cases, but I think a lot of authors would have been game to show up to do anything as long as Lucasfilm was interested. There are not that many cases I know of where authors just said no to Lucasfilm.
Yeah, well,
because if they knock on your door, I mean, you're probably going to want to play ball. I will say though that the way it went afterwards, it's a unique time because Lucy Wilson finished at the end of NJO, and Stover and Luceno were working directly with George for Labyrinth of Evil and Revenge of the Sith. So they're not really around I mean, Luceno's being invited to the meeting, but they're not really around to shape what happens afterwards. Denon could just do whatever he wants for Dark Nest. And then for Legacy of the Force in 2004, they really have this idea of we want to do something like the prequels. We want to do it. So that was something that it was just a certain conflicts of factors. I will mention just as a funny aside that I think I have figured out what caused Lucy to leave, which is crazy. In one of her interviews, she makes a vague reference to the fact that after NJO, I mean, you go from, I know you haven't read it, but you go from editing Unifying Force, leading the NJO, to, she said they wanted her to do video game tie-ins. And she was so bored with that idea that you would just write a book to follow a video game. And I thought to myself, well, she's done in 2003. What video game tie-ins are they working on in 2003? And I look, and lo and behold, is Star Wars Galaxy's Ruins of Dantooine. And this book is kind of notorious. Some people think it's very, very, very bad. I've never read it. But I think going from the Unifying Force to Ruins of Dantooine, which I think is what happened, was probably such a shock to the system that when Lucy said, I'm not keen on this, that actually made its way to George. And George was like, oh, well, Lucy's my buddy, so I'll just move you over to the nonfiction. So yeah, that's just kind of a funny turn. Another quick thing I'll mention, since you asked this question, very relevant to your asking of it. I am putting together, it's not out yet, but I am putting together a document which will be on the subreddit, Star Wars EU, it is an outline, it's a reconstructed outline of what the NJO authors wanted to do after NJO. So I've gone through the interviews and reconstructed the different ideas they had. Wow. So for those people out there who maybe aren't super fans of what happens afterwards, if you are, that's fine. But if you aren't, or if you're just curious, there will be this outline. And the cool thing is they do kind of agree generally about what the galaxy would look like, what the characters are doing. It's pretty interesting to think about, actually. It's a very different future.
Yeah, that's crazy that you can find that stuff and put it together, man. Because even me going through this, trying to talk to authors to have them come on or other creators it's tough. I mean, it's tough. And now to try to find all this documentation or lost conversations or little excerpts from years back. And it's just like the gentleman had his in a hard drive in his garage, probably in a box on a second shelf or something, right, next to the Christmas decorations.
Yeah, it's so true. I had uploaded a couple videos earlier this year of Timothy Zahn, some subtitles from Celebration 3, where he talks about coming up with the concept of the Yuuzhan Vong, and he talks about his perspective towards Ben Skywalker. And that was something I was actually after for like a year. I had messaged this guy, and he's like, oh yeah, I videoed it. I was at Celebration 3. And it's like, well, do you still have it? He's like, oh, I'd have to go through my old computers. It took like a year. eventually he came around and he said, "Hey, I found it. There you go."
That's cool.
So
That's cool. That's great that he got back to you.
yeah. Thank you so much. Second quest. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, that's great that that stuff is still out there. I'm glad people hold on to certain things. You know, you never know. Some people
Yeah.
say, well, you got to get rid of your old junk or your pack rat or all them terms, but some things that you have, just like some of the lost EU material that's resurfacing,
Mm-hmm.
some of the, you know, that's it's great. And you mentioned Nightfall. Now that was
Mm.
a book that was canceled. I
Mm-hmm.
know we're jumping around here a little bit, but you're hitting on some of the things I wanted to ask you about. So this kind of plays in perfectly. So what was that whole debacle about? Like what was there books that were replacing that or did it fell through?
It's an interesting one. So Nightfall, there was a trilogy. Jedi, I think it's like Jedi Storm and Jedi. All these is like a Jedi trilogy. So it was the Nightfall series. It would have taken place after Balance Point, I think. And yeah, I mean, I think I could be wrong about this, but I think that Greg Keyes at that point was slotted to do one book, and then
Mm.
it got expanded to two. But I think Greg was still uh, slated in there to do one, although I could be wrong about that. But Nightfall was a trilogy. It was going to follow Danny Quee and this Jedi named Jarellin. Danny would have been going around. She's a scientist, but she's also kind of reporting on what's going on. And maybe there was some romance with Jorlin. I have no idea. But Jorlin has this past. I don't think most people know very much about what that was. At that time, Luke and those guys are trying to form the Great River, try to protect the Jedi. And Yuuzhan Vong are after Balance Point. The call has been given out. We want the Jedi. So they are hunting down Jedi. And so the series would have also been, that trilogy would have been about taking out the Jedi and such. So, I mean, I think also there was an element, the Shaper that's in Conquest. I don't know if it would have been the same Shaper, but there was a female Shaper that would have been a pretty big part of Nightfall. And I think the cover art might have depicted her, actually.
Nemyen.
Yeah, it might have been her. I'm not sure. But if it wasn't her, it was conceptually a similar thing.
Okay.
So, yeah, as for why it didn't work, well, Michael Jan Friedman, who is a Star Trek author, he had written first draft, I think. And then second and third, were outlines. I don't know if he even got started on the second one. There was artwork that was done for the first one and the second one. But as for why it didn't work, well, there's a couple of reasons. And some of this will be in the documentary. One of them, which documentary doesn't have a title yet, gotta think. But one of the reasons was that basically Lucasfilm sales for the tie-in novels for the prequels were underwhelming. They had expected the prequel novels to sell better than they did. They sold, but they didn't sell as well as they were hoping. And so one way they tried to fix that was they looked, they had a contract with Del Rey, certain number of paperbacks a year, a certain number of hardcovers a year. And NJO actually outsold expectations. They didn't expect it to do so well. And they were hoping it would do well. They didn't think it would be doing that well. And it's hanging with Harry Potter and Dark Tower and all this stuff on the New York Times list. They didn't expect it. So, so they decided to pull. They said, you know what? Instead of doing 3 books for NJO, what we could do instead is we'll do 2 hardcovers for the prequel time. And so I think, I could be wrong, but I think the 2 books that were given were Darth Maul Shadow Hunter and Cloak of Deception, I think they were born because Nightfall died. That was the trade, which I have not read either book, but I've heard they're good, so maybe that's a good thing. But as for Nightfall, there was also a narrative decision. They made the decision that maybe, and it's probably due to reader feedback, that the series may have been wandering a bit at that point. They felt that needed to focus especially because Anakin had a limited time that you could work with him. So they decided maybe we're not going to focus on Danny. Maybe we're going to focus more on Anakin. And so now I don't know if it's at that point that Greg Keyes was given the book. I'm not sure if Greg Keyes was given the book as they were considering this, or if it was a separate question to Axe Nightfall. There's still some mysterious things. But either way, more focus was decided to be given to Anakin. And then he was expanded to a duology. I think another thing that happened was because they were concerned that people wouldn't care about Anakin dying. So they wanted to make it really important. But I think the other thing is the situation between Leia and Han would have been longer to fix. And I think this is one of the reasons that the ebook or the novella by Troy Denning, Recovery, was written.
Prologue, we'll say.
Yeah, I think that was kind of said, well, we got rid of Nightfall. So basically things worked in such a way that suddenly, Kathy Tyers has got to make them work it out in balance point. And I think initially they were going to have Han and Leia have more issues for longer. They would have gotten back together, but it would have been for longer.
Oh, yeah. It was rough at moments, man.
Right. And I think they heard that from readers. Luceno has talked about that readers were not happy with what was happening. So just because they didn't want, readers were afraid that they would break up. So, so they decided to bring them back together sooner. There are a couple things that were done. I think that first third of the series where you've got loss after loss after loss and everybody's running and you've got Agents of Chaos and Han's like deadbeat dad and kind of drunken and all this other stuff. And then you've got, balance point and Jacen won't use the Force. And you have all this stuff, which is really heavy, and Jaina's losing her friend and all this. So you have all this stuff that's so heavy that there were some things that they changed. I think the outline was a bit darker. They decided to change to make it a bit lighter. So for instance, Kathy Tyers suggested we should have the baby be born now because they thought that the baby, initially the idea was that a pregnancy would be announced like in unifying force or the birth would be happening later. And so, but Kathy said, no, we should move it earlier to bring like a happy moment in all the darkness. And that would be helpful for readers if they had something that they could be happy about. And so they evidently were on board with this. And so then, Ben was born and I think it's rebirth. And then that was the other thing, that Han and Leia getting back together earlier and having it work out was a choice that they made to say, no, let's put a little bow on this imbalance point. And it's kind of worked out because, Leia ends up kind of being Han's co-pilot, which is perfect.
I thought that was a beautiful moment.
Yeah. There's one other element of Nightfall. I'll just quick mention. The only other thing I know is that there was a lot more emphasis on droid rights, and droid sentience. Like the droids, you might have picked up a little bit on that in the Agents of Chaos duology. That there is this thing of the droids being pretty anxious about, the Yuuzhan Vong are like an existential threat to them.
Yeah.
So, there would have been more about that, I think. And that was cut. Luceno has talked about how he's kind of sad that got cut, but it got cut just because there's so many subplots in NJO and they had to focus a little bit. They couldn't keep it all. So they decided we'll cut that. We'll focus more on Anakin. We'll make the marriage work out. And to this day, Michael Jan Friedman, they've asked him, could you release it like Heart of the Jedi? Could you? And he's like, they paid me not to release it. So, yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
No shit.
Yeah, they did. Now, Greg Keyes has said that there was a book that, test readership. The test reader audience that Del Rey had was pretty intense, and they would make some changes. I know. I don't think it's a spoiler to say this, but Dala, a character from the Bantam era, she would have died very early in her introduction if not for test readership saying, no, we want her. And so they said to Kevin, you got to change this. Readers love her. So they kept her around. And so, Greg Keyes has said before that there was one book that could never get through the test readership. It doesn't matter how many times they tried, the test readers just rejected it. He didn't say what book it was. Now, Greg Keyes is would have known what happened to Nightfall, so maybe he's talking about Nightfall. Maybe he's not. Maybe he's talking about Heart of the Jedi. I suspect he's probably talking about Nightfall. But they at the time, just to dispel any notions that Lucasfilm just did whatever. No, they had like a quality control. They were trying to make sure they didn't just pump out anything. And sometimes the test readership just wouldn't accept it. So I think that's another thing that might have contributed to Nightfall just not working out.
Okay. Yeah, I was just curious because I'm doing a little research on my own, and then you mentioned that previously, and I didn't pick up on it at the time because obviously I wasn't reading through the series. But it was just I was wondering because it's always interesting to find out the little odds and ends of things. That's why this documentary is going to be great, man. It's going to be
Yeah, I'm
stellar.
glad that you're excited for it.
Yeah, I
I
really am.
think, yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, I think Dan Wallace was asked once about whether if Nightfall was released, which it probably will never be, but if it was, would fans find a lot of new stuff to chew on? And he kind of said not really, because a lot of the stuff that was in Nightfall, they found a way to weave it back in with the rest of the series.
Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, you touched on a lot of things there, and Han and Leia's relationship. I mean, he lost Chewie, so I can understand the grief. Sometimes, to me, it felt like it was they dragged it out a little bit,
Right.
maybe, and then he became like the deadbeat dad, like you said, the drunken, just whatever, go do your Leia, get out of here, and then they were completely. It's like, man, this is like fire and
Yeah.
ice here. I'm glad they brought it back around, but there's a lot of I think you nailed it there, but there's a lot of real life, like you said, it helped. You could relate to some of the things that were happening in the book because they were happening in your real world. But like that's a real thing. You
Mm-hmm.
lose somebody, you grieve, you suffer, you kind of push everyone away. Jacen just like confused with I don't know about the Force. I'm not using that. I'm doing my own thing. I'm not going to follow Master Luke, Uncle Luke. But it was good to
So
see.
you saying that just brought something to my mind. Not to interrupt you, but Indiana Jones. Have you seen the Dial of Destiny?
No, I have not. I have not.
Well, geez, do you
You can
mind if I
spoil
say
it.
something? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Spoiler alert. Anybody who wants to see it, pause, skip ahead like 1 minute. But it just occurred to me that Harrison Ford's character, he mentions in the movie that his son died in Vietnam, and that led to the separation of him and his wife. And how ironic. We've seen this before. Agents of Chaos, right?
Wow.
Chewie. But yeah, that's really crazy. But and apparently Ben going to the dark side in the sequels also led to the separation. So yeah, maybe there's something that these writers just keep coming back to. But what I like about NJO is that unlike the other stuff, well, Dial of Destiny not necessarily, but unlike the sequels, they do get back together. And actually, it feels long for us, but it's not that long. It's like, a couple books maybe.
Right.
And
Right.
they come back, and that's really nice because you can't have Han and Leia fall apart. I mean, that would just be so tragic. So
Yeah.
I love their relationship through the series, and Luke and Mara's relationship. I love seeing that. You really get to see these couples go through adversity and stick together.
I was gonna mention that it's great to see Mara and Luke and how they act and kind of feed off each other and
Yeah.
a little banter that they have. I was gonna say also on Anakin's death, like it didn't really hit me until the next chapter when I read about Leia when
Oh,
she felt it in the Force, man.
yeah. And
That
what a
was
double
heartbreaking.
whammy for her. I mean, she loses him, which is catastrophic. But then it's Coruscant. I mean, she gives that speech, which is unforgettable. But then she also, I can't remember who says this, but so someone says like the New Republic is dead, and she goes, "It died a long time ago." I mean, it's just kind of it's the low point for the series, and I'm glad most readers didn't do this. I would not encourage people to do this, but I do know that a couple of people did stop after Star by Star. It's just too dark for them to handle. I don't think that was what a person should do. I wouldn't turn off Empire Strikes Back when Luke goes down the chute, but
Yeah.
you know, I mean, I can
Well,
understand it's a tough moment, as I think it's something Frodo and Sam talk about in Lord of the Rings, which is, you know, at this point in the story, they were saying, "Hey, shut the book, Dad." But yeah, you know, it's a lot to handle, but that's one of the reasons I respect the series, because it's willing to do it, but it's also willing to do it at the right moment. It's important to have that moment, maybe in the middle of the series. People are a lot more critical if the ending is like that. If the middle is like that, we can accept it. If it's the ending, that's where you sometimes get people go, "All right, I'm
yeah.
done."
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Even Jaina and what she's going through. And especially in Star by Star, where she's like she's flirting, we'll say, with the dark side.
Yeah.
Like that
Oh,
kind
yeah.
of that took me back a little bit too.
Yeah, Jaina is such an interesting character. You know, I've been reading through some of the young Jedi Knights novels, and it's cool seeing so many character traits that they have continued in NJO. And Jaina's one of those characters. She's always been kind of straightforward. There's a good scene. I think it's in the 13th book, Young Jedi Knights, where there's this character Anja, and she has a issue with drugs, and they're all debating. Once they figure this out, they're all trying to debate. Um, how do we want to break it to her? How do we want to tell Anja that we know? And Jacen's like, well, maybe we could hint at this. Jaina's just like, why don't we just ask her? I don't want to fool around with any of this. And so, Jaina just flat out brings it up. And, everybody else is like, oh. But that's always how Jaina's been. And she stays like that in NJO. I mean, there's a great conversation with her and her mother in Balance Point where I don't remember exactly how it goes, but it's a great conversation where Leia's saying something about, well, I'm a Jedi. I could help. And Jaina's like, Mom, really? I mean, you haven't really
You haven't
done
really
the
done it.
training.
Yeah.
And I mean, Jaina, she calls it as she sees it. And she's a character that she's very different from both of her brothers. In a lot of ways, she perhaps has more similarities to Anakin than Jacen. She's a character that's she's very grounded. And when you're that grounded in a war situation and you lose people, it can make you bitter really fast. Jacen retreats into his own head to protect himself.
Yeah.
But Jaina has no protection. She goes out to the front lines and she's ready to go, but it takes a toll on her. And where you're at in the series, that doesn't end there. I mean, it's taking a toll on her, and then losing by the end of Star by Star, she has lost both of her brothers. And so that's a traumatic event for her, very traumatic. And so she's the character. She really goes to the ringer, and we get to see how she works that out. Some of my favorite quotes of the series have to do with Jaina, either quotes that she makes or quotes that Luke says to her. I don't think this is too much of a spoiler, but there's a great line in Destiny's Way where Luke is talking with her, and she's lost so much at that point, and Luke says something along the lines of despair is where the dark side can come in. If we really believe that our actions are meaningless and that nothing matters and nothing we do matters, that's when the dark side can really come in. And then he looks her right in the eye and says, we can't let that happen. She's like, all right, because she really gets in that despairing state. And I love that it's Luke who says that, because if we think about Return of the Jedi, that's what the Emperor tried to do when the Emperor couldn't convince Luke out of power, out of tempting him for power, because Luke doesn't care about power. Once that didn't work, Palpatine really pushed the despair angle. Your fleet is lost. Your friends are gone, and that's what does drive Luke. Despair, the idea that Vader would try to turn light on the dark side. So I think I love that Luke has that wisdom, and it really hits home for Jaina, because she's a character that loses her friend, loses her droid, loses so many things, and her brothers, and just, I mean, she's a warrior. I mean, the Young Indiana Jones series has a series of documentaries that George endorsed that they made, and one of them focuses on World War I pilots. And watching it, I was so reminded of Jaina. And this is all real stuff. I mean, where like I think it's literally the Red Baron, like one of the greatest pilots or whatever. He was great, but as time went on, the war wore on him. And he's like, what is this for? I don't even try to learn people's names anymore because they're just going to be gone next week.
Yeah.
That's kind of where Jaina ends up.
Yeah, she's more like a real, I don't want to say nobody else is real, but like a real person. Like she's like you said, grounded. That was a good choice of words for her character. And she's similar to Luke in a sense too. Like
she reminds me a lot of her father.
Yeah. I mean, she's got wisdom there. And Luke had some really good moments too in Star by Star with him addressing the council when he was going there trying to explain. And then Vicky Shesh always cutting him off and trying to, like, that character really pissed me off.
Oh, speaking of the characters that piss us off, I think it's time for us to talk a little bit about Borsk.
Okay.
And the legacy of Borsk.
That son of a B. But can we take a minute here? I gotta.
Sure.
All right. Take a little intermission here, and then we'll come right back.
Okay.
I'll be right back.
Cool.
Okay. You there?
Yeah.
Okay. Just making sure here. Just had a bathroom break.
Sure. When I was a kid, maybe we won't leave. I don't know. We could leave this in. When I was a kid, I could never understand how I'd read these books, Jedi Apprentice, Jedi Quest. Nobody ever mentioned a bathroom break, so I just was puzzled. I just thought, do they just not in Star Wars? It's just I could never understand it.
You're right. There's never that moment.
No one ever says 1 second, Qui-Gon.
I'll be honest with you. When I started doing this, we can leave this in too. I don't care. But there was times it's like, man, I always, because I respected and I appreciated everyone, and I was so thankful that they wanted to talk with me. It's like I'd be holding my pee for a long time, and it's like, man, do any of these guys got a pee too? But I was always too nervous to ask, and it's like now I'm just like, nope. It's like we're all human.
That's funny.
Yeah. So, but anyway, Borsk.
Oh man.
that throughout this. Okay, so he's been in a lot of the books.
Oh yeah.
He's been in a lot of material, and I'll let you continue on. But yeah, he really, really pissed me off a lot.
Yeah,
but
and
I
then
will
got
say,
that ending.
yes, and that's what I was. And then he does that, and to me, that kind of redeemed a little bit.
The interesting thing about Borsk, so I got interested in him a little bit more than usual when I was, I think one of the things, and you can see all my collected material that I posted on the subreddit I have an archived post on my profile called the collected posts and so on. And one of them, or actually a couple of them, has to do with the signing of the Declaration of a New Republic. And I think there's another one that's a declaration of, the free alliances or whatever. Like he's there from the get-go. He's there from the jump. Borsk is there to sign, the rebellion. He's there to sign the creation of the New Republic. Now, just to put that in perspective, he's from Kothless, but he's representing Bothui. Just to put that in perspective, everyone who signs that document, it's the same way with the Declaration of Independence in America, in any place that there's been a revolution. Anyone who signs that document is signing their own death warrant if they lose. If you sign that document and you say that's naked treason to the Empire. I mean, it took the Empire 20 years just to recognize the legitimacy of that document. I mean, they just refused until Hand of Thrawn to actually say, all right, fine, you guys aren't the rebels anymore. You're the New Republic. But it took them forever. They're in denial. Well, the fact of the matter is, for anyone signing that document, it takes a tremendous amount of courage or whatever, what have you, to sign that, to say, you know what, whether you're Thomas Jefferson or Borsk Fey'lya, to put your pen to paper and say, I am saying in front of everyone, this is my name, this is where you can find me, and I do not support this tyrannical government. And so, I mean, that's putting a mark right on the back of your head to take you out. And everyone who signed that. So that when I saw that, Of course, I had read NJO, but that also made me think about Borsk. And Borsk is this interesting guy who he is this careerist. He's annoying as all get out throughout the Bantam books because he's always a thorn in the Jedi side. He's pretty self-motivated. He just wants power. But this is the crazy thing about Borsk. And I think it's one of the things that adds so much to the Star Wars universe to have characters like this. In a way, it's like Pelion. He's a character that we really can't love all the things he loves. We really can't root for all the things he roots for. But we can understand why he is the way he is because people like him do exist. And someone like Borsk is definitely a real person. I mean, a lot of politicians are like that. And the interesting thing with Borsk is he is a careerist. He is selfish. He's interested in himself. He's interested in power. And he believes in the ideals of the New Republic.
Yeah.
He believes that the New Republic is something worth having. He doesn't want the Yuuzhan Vong to win. So you have this interesting mix of somebody that you really can't stand, but at the same time, he would never betray the New Republic. That would never happen. That he would ever be willing. So it's very hard for us to say the words honorable and Borsk in the same sentence, but there is an element of honor with his character right next to the corruption.
Man, yeah. I mean, you nailed it. He, from some of the material from the Bantam era that I read, he's always been just a pain in the ass, and he's always for himself, and he's just cocky and the kind of mischievous, in a way, per se. And then you get to NJO, and now he's starting to come back a little bit. He's doing some courageous things, and then the way that what he does there when Coruscant is, spoiler, taken over.
Yeah.
And he's looking at the Vong. He's like, I want to talk to the War Master. Get him here. I got to talk to him. And he's got that little device, and he's just waiting. And then, I mean, obviously, the War Master wasn't coming. That kind of blew my mind when that happened. And then seeing them watch, Han and Leia watch as they know what just happened.
Yeah.
Was wild.
It felt so real to me. That's a real moment. You can look in history and see people who have such a questionable past, but when it comes down to it, they're just like, you know what? If I have to choose my side, I'm choosing this. I mean, I'm going to make a comparison here that a lot of people might go, what? But look at Darth Vader. Let's say you don't know anything about the Anakin. Let's say you just know Darth Vader from the Empire. This is a guy who's killed people, countless amount of people. He has supervised destruction of worlds. He has engaged in torture himself, personally, torturing people. He's a bad guy. And then at the 11th hour, he goes, yeah, but I'm not going to let my son die. So let's throw the Empire down the chute. To a lot of people in the Empire, what if you're a person in the Empire like Pelion, and maybe Palpatine's not your favorite person at the end of the day? How do you see someone like Vader? You say, well, I never got along with the guy, but at the end of the day, and so I think Borsk is kind of our little mini Vader. He's a thorn in our side, and he does a lot of things that we wouldn't agree with. But at the end of the day, he doesn't want to see the galaxy destroyed. And I'm sure, some people have read that scene and they've gone, nope, still a coward. He couldn't find any way for power for himself. So he just, and you know what? You could see it that way. But again, it takes, if you pardon my language, it takes some balls to write that signatory document back then, 25 years ago. And it also takes courage to sit there and say, call up the War Master. Bring him here. I want to talk to him. I mean, it takes courage to stay in the heart of darkness. So he, and that's the other thing. That book, such a whammy. Not only losing Anakin, but to lose Coruscant. That was the thing that really made me question. Because you say, you lose a character, that's hard. You lose Coruscant, you ain't ever getting that thing back. Yeah. I mean, because if Coruscant falls, how do you actually win? I mean, how strategically are you going to win? because it's not just a matter of, oh, it's a planet. Coruscant is the planet. I mean,
It
and after this, it's going to be Vong formed and changed forever. I mean, it's not a spoiler to tell you this, but um, NJO kind of sets up Coruscant in such a way that by the end of the series, because of what happens in Star by Star, it's pretty much implied that Coruscant's going to need to be rebuilt for couple hundred more years if anyone can live there. I mean, and like because of the destruction and that's all stuff that's just happened in Star by Star, and
yeah.
all those organisms getting down there and everything happening, and once they're Vong, I mean, they are kind of like a virus; they just won't leave.
Yeah,
So they
man.
spread in all directions, and so now that was not followed by the following series. I think it's like 5 years later. Dark Nest is like that, but but that's a different vision. But yeah, the Coruscant situation, it's crazy, and I could be wrong about this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I seem to remember in the battle for Coruscant, one of the moons is shattered or
Yeah.
something like that,
Hmm.
and it creates this like rainbow like ring around the planet. To me, that is one of the most stunning images in my mind from the series. Rainbow ring around Coruscant.
Yeah. Yeah, it's wild that we were talking about that today. It's like, where do we go from here?
Yeah, and I
Because we don't
distinctly
know.
remember, those refugee ships and the Vong kind of saying, well, "We'll put them in the front. We'll see if they'll shoot on their own ships." That's exactly what those guys would do. It's crazy.
Yeah, this whole setup for NJO with the Vong is just
Mm.
incredible. Like you said earlier,
Yeah.
there's different layers to them.
It's every sci-fi thing every sci-fi fan wants in one package. You've got, Shedao Shai has those predator dreadlocks and the skull, and the
Yeah.
Voxen are like the little xenomorphs from Alien. They're really these terrible bleed acid and all this. And
Yeah,
then
man.
you've got there's a little bit of the Thing in Vector Prime when they touch down on the planet. I don't know if you've ever seen the Thing, but when they touch down on in Vector Prime, I mean, Yeoman Carr he's got that Ulith masker. They don't know who is the traitor. Well, that's the thing. That's the thing. That's the whole premise of that movie. And then I know in some of the Agents of Chaos books, I think, or something like that, they talk about these tripod type things, which you can look up images of these fire breathers. They're basically the War of the Worlds guys. Coruscant, you got Independence Day, and all these things. It's just all the sci-fi, and I love it. I mean,
Yeah,
I it's just great.
you made me just think of different things. That's what there's so much to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
The I had to Google because I like to have an image in my head sometimes of what I mean.
Yeah.
I believe we all do. We can
Yeah.
create it in our own. They give good descriptions, but okay, we got Wikipedia and all these other things out there for us. And I don't read whatever I'm looking up. I don't try to read any of the material because I already
Right.
that spoils stuff immediately, and I don't want that to happen. But the Voxen, when they started talking about them, I'm like, what is this thing?
I
It's
know.
hunting Jedi. It's like it's
I know.
crazy. It knows where they are.
It's truly terrifying, and that's a credit to Mr. Danning because
They got a
he
Yaz
came up.
Mallory tree. It's like,
Yep, he came up with the idea of the Voxen, which I think was a great invention. I mean, there was a concept to say there's a big threat to the Jedi, but he nailed it down. And I think the Voxen, and of course, Greg Keyes set that up in his books, but the Voxen are just. It's so great because not only are they a threat, but it's an evolution from the stuff established in Conquest and Rebirth that this genetic modifications, the Shapers are messing with nature to create these abominations. And I mean, that it's terrifying. Like the Twi'lek sisters that, of course, everybody has it seared into their mind. If they read Star by Star, one of them gets their face burned off or whatever. I mean, it's an unbelievable. And now some people say, a lot of people have Star by Star as their favorite Star Wars book, and I respect that. If you look on Goodreads, people just love this book, and I respect that too because it is such a good book. I would say for me, if I had to go top five, it's probably like five or something for me. But I think that book. Some people have criticized this as too dark for Star Wars. It's just too dark. But I agree in one way. It's too dark to stay there. right? We can't stay there. We can't make Star Wars like this all the time. But I don't think it's too dark to go there. I think
Yeah.
I don't think it's too dark to go there when we're in the belly of the beast, when we're at the bottom
Yeah.
of the whale. And it's like Empire Strikes Back. You cut off Luke's hand, he's hanging from the weather vane. I mean, we're at the very bottom here, so we're going to see the very bottom, the ugliest. And the series doesn't stay there, which of course is nice because we don't actually want to see our galaxy completely eviscerated.
Yeah.
But it's important to go there. If you don't go there, if you don't show how horrible this is, then you don't have the horror in the audience that the characters feel. If it's all off screen, like you can suggest some of it off screen, but if it's all off screen, then we will never feel the fear that the characters feel, and we have to feel that for the series to work. So I think Star by Star, without Star by Star, NJO doesn't work.
Yeah. Dark and gruesome. There were moments, especially when Jaina goes to get Anakin
Yeah,
in the
geez.
pit, and
the lightning.
there was some dark stuff happening there. And one thing I will say is, my buddy James mentioned this while we were discussing this today, is how come Anakin didn't become one with the Force? Now, if this is some sort of a spoiler moment for me later on, please don't answer that. But everybody else that has died, they just kind of, evaporate, become one with the Force.
Sure.
And when this battle scene was happening, where he was doing the ultimate glorious, amazing, incredible, the scene, it's just stuck in my mind right now of him doing this, and he's glowing. The Force is burning like a bright. True, it was intense, man. And it was also mentioned in the Crystal Star that he always had this aurora, like this glow to him.
Good catch. So
are you
asking?
Yeah, I am. But if there's something that it's just how come he didn't do that when he passed on? Like, how come?
I don't think I can answer that.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, I for your own safety, I don't think I can answer that.
Okay.
Fair enough. Forward.
That's
but there are some things there are
thoughts.
some things in the series that are left ambiguous, and keep your eyes peeled. That's all I'll say. So
Okay.
it's interesting. I don't know. I mean, yeah. I'm trying to remember that scene. Going back for the body. I remember Return of the Jedi when Vader dies. He must not die. Like, he must not go to the Force super suddenly, because if he did, we would see it. And if he did, it'd be pretty hard for Luke to drag each individual piece of the armor up onto the ship and then put it together again on the fire pit.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
maybe there was a body there for a little while, and then eventually you fade. I mean, I don't know if everybody, Qui-Gon's body's there for a while, and he's just laying there, and he's dead. And so I don't know. I mean, I think when you're someone like Yoda, it might be lickety split. Same thing with Obi-Wan.
Yeah.
Maybe there's a speed to this thing. I don't know if there's a duration of fade, I will say.
Okay.
But I will say, though, I think, and I won't say anything about the future, but characters in the Star Wars saga who really are on it, Force-wise, they really get it. Like, they're masters. Anakin was great, but he's no master. But masters, they seem to become one with the Force right away, and they become ghosts right away. And Obi-Wan, Yoda, dot.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fair enough.
But yeah. Go ahead.
He mentioned that, and it's like, yeah, it made me wonder, because I didn't kind of grab that right away. But now that you mention it in a way, like certain mass, like Yoda, that's who came, Yoda, Obi-Wan. So it was interesting. And then that
it is an interesting thing. There's so many things going on in Star by Star. I mean, Denning tells this funny story about going into the meeting to do all this with Stover and everybody. And they tell him, say, some of the stuff from Nightfall, some of the stuff we didn't get a chance, so you're gonna have to put that in Star by Star. And some of the stuff from later, we should actually put it in Star by Star. And so the outline is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually, Denning's like this
How am I going
book
to
is
fit
going to be
this in?
long.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're like, is that a problem? He's like, well, it's not a problem for me, but it's a problem for you because this could be a long book. And I think Star by Star for a while was one of the longest Star Wars books. It might still be.
Yeah.
Um,
We're on, going to start Dark Journey tonight, and it's
oh,
not that.
perfect.
It's not that.
Yeah,
I
and
was,
same thing with Traitor. Traitor's pretty small, but Star by Star is loaded. And I have to give credit to him to cover so much territory in one book. I forgot to mention this, but YVH droids, also something I think he invented. Terminator.
yeah.
So you got Terminator versus the alien. How much better can we get?
It was good to get some Lando in this book, too.
Oh my gosh, that whole thing about Lando's catchphrases going up against the you should find this. You should search it up. Every once in a while, there's somebody makes a very funny meme
Okay.
of NJO, and this is one of the funniest memes I think has been made. It's a video. It just shows a YVH droids, and it's just Lando's phrases from just put through robot voice.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like going up against these Yuuzhan Vong going Han, oh buddy. Like it's just incredible.
Oh,
He's got to
man.
buy us more time.
That was cool. That was a whole cool. It was
Yeah,
just good
it's
to
it,
see
it was
him
it was
involved.
a light moment in a dark book. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but you're right. There's so much going on. And we talked about this today too. There's a lot of Jedi. There's a lot of characters I didn't know. I could tell that it was nice that they make references to the past material. Like some of the scenes with Jaina and Jacen and how they talked about her, even Tenel Ka. I would assume they came from the Young Jedi Knights books.
Yeah, and Denning's a big fan of those. That Star by Star was the book that introduced me to that whole gang because I never read those growing up. So like Tenel Ka and Ganner, and Ganner's invented, but he was from
Yeah.
Dark Tide. But Tenel Ka and Zach
Uh,
and
yep.
Tahiri was before. But you get all these characters from the early days introduced. Lobaka. And
Well,
that's
yeah.
great because that's a testament to Star by Star that they got seared into my mind, this gang, and they're going through it. I mean, sadly, there are some people on the strike team who just don't last very long. But
No.
but
No.
I think there's a scene. The scene I reread it the other day. The scene where they all meet to decide to send the strike force and why they should do it. Because if you're just describing to somebody, say, why on earth would Luke send all these younger
All the
people to do
kids,
this?
yeah.
But the way the scene is written, it is executed very well. So that by the end of the scene, we believe that this is a doable plan. Anakin wants to go. He's almost not even letting someone stop him. Luke is reluctant to do this, but they bring up this point. If Luke goes, if all these guys go, attracts too much attention. And I love that there is a scene there. The crazy thing, and gosh darn it, Denning, you're really bringing it down. But the decision comes to Han. Han is the one that has to make that choice.
Yeah.
And it comes down to Han. And the great thing I love about that scene is that even though Han doesn't want to, he knows that Anakin's probably going to anyway. And he there's a good moment between them where you can really see how much Han cares about Anakin, and that the water is under the bridge over what happened with Chewie. That Han does love Anakin and things are okay again. And you can see that. I know some people have brought that up and said, "Oh man, Chewie sacrificed himself for Anakin, then Anakin dies. So what the hell?" But and then Han never works it out. Well, he actually does work it out. If you look in Star by Star, they've worked it out. So I like that they worked it out before he went.
Yeah. Oh man, when you were talking about that, it just made me think back to I remember that moment when Han looked at him and just said, "You left him."
Oh man,
That hurt, man. I cried. I ain't gonna lie. My eyes were watering.
yeah, yeah. And in that one moment, I'm gonna be real with you. I like Han as a character, but in that one moment, I think Han became more three-dimensional in a way that he probably never was in Bantam. We really got to see Han, his other side, the darker side. We get to see him as a hurting person. You know, Han, we usually think of the guy who's got the quips and he's the cool guy. And
Yeah.
in that moment, I like NJO because sure, it's painful, but they give Han an arc. Everybody has an arc in NJO. Nobody's just sitting around. Even Luke. You know, Luke's big crisis for the whole series is I don't want to create 100 Darth Vaders if it means beating the Vong. And how am I supposed to deal with these New Republic guys? And the whole schism, you've got people like Kip, and you have that whole disagreement. Anakin and Jaina and Jacen are not even on the same page about where they fall on that.
No, there's a lot, man. They hit all this. It's just, this is wild. I'm so glad that I'm reading this. And I've read some
It
of the
goes
other.
pretty deep, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's just like, this is a whole, this thing has just got it all, man.
To me, it feels like it has the heft of something that would be a sequel era. It
Yeah.
feels like something that is deep enough. It's strong enough on its own. Some people say the Thrawn trilogy for them is the sequel trilogy. I know they've asked him if he's on that, and he goes, "No, I think of it as 6.1, 6.2, 6.3." He doesn't think of it as a 7, 8, and 9. And I have to say, I kind of agree with that. I see the Thrawn trilogy as a stepping stone. It's a good story to launch things. But for something with the heft, the weight, the characters, the next generation, the depth of the story, I think New Jedi Order is the only one that I see that has that. And I'm including the sequel trilogy there because I just think NJO is above the rest. I mean, there is a great moment also in Star by Star, speaking of depth, character depth, where you know Anakin and Jacen are talking about this, and Jacen has had his issues, and Anakin has kind of sets him straight and goes,
Yeah.
I'm the team leader, and if you come on this mission with me, you've got to do what I say." And it's like a little brother moment where you're like, "All right, big brother, you listen to me now."
Yeah. That's true.
And you know, to his credit, Jacen goes along with this, even though he's still he's had his moment where he saved his mother, but he still doesn't have it all worked out, and that's for a future book.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Even the Dark Jedi. I was surprised to see that happen in here.
Yeah. So
I,
it's great that NJO decided to pull in so many things from so many sides of the universe.
yeah, dude. I'm loving it. I was reading another book series while I was reading this because we try to plan it so we don't get ahead of each other. We read so many chapters a week and we get together, right? I mentioned this. But I was reading another book and now I'm at a stopping point right now because this is the cat's meow. Like I just I can't stop, and now I really don't want to stop because, like I said, this is kind of left. It, I don't want to say it like a cliffhanger, but the ending. We got Jacen, it's gone. Jaina's losing her marbles and really mad, right? So
Yeah.
I'm just like, I'm ready. I'm ready.
But there was a
Ready.
cool thing for you to look forward to there. Is that I know Elaine has talked about working with Denning, and they had a little conversation where Elaine's like, "I want to start the book here," and Denning's like, "Oh, there." And Elaine's like, "Yeah, I want to start it right here." And Denning's like, "Okay." And so then, could we link it up? So where Star by Star literally ends, I think Dark Journey starts. Right. So
Oh,
it's
good.
just a seamless transition. And yeah, I mean, it's so cool how they structured it. Sometimes it was hard for certain authors. I mean, if you're Troy Denning with Star by Star, you kind of know how you're going to structure that thing. If you're Elaine Cunningham given Dark Journey, that's a different situation. Everybody's recovering. So it's a different type of story. So there are stories that I think were some of the big epic moments are, I don't want to say easy to write, but you know what you're doing. The slower moments, you know, that I think it was executed well, but I think it was something that was a challenge for a lot of the writers. I mean, I know some of the writers said it was so hard for them to write Luke because of how do you write someone who's pretty much figured it out but can't solve everything.
Yeah.
That's a tricky scenario. In fact, that's the reason, if you didn't know this, that's why Luke is not in The Force Awakens. That's why he doesn't use the Force very much in Last Jedi. That's why he's not in Rise of Skywalker, because the writers could never figure out how do we have Luke there as a Jedi Master and not solve everything. And so they could never, for them, they could never solve that. And one of the reasons I respect the new Jedi Order writing team is they also struggle with it. But in my opinion, they nailed it. They found a way to do it. They found a way to write it in such a way where, yes, it was still a problem for them, but they wrote through that. They tackled that problem. And they grew the characters of Jacen and Jaina and Anakin and all these other Corran and everybody to such a height that we cared about their story now. And that's one of the reasons I love NJO, is because you care about, I mean, Michael Arndt, who wrote the first draft of Force Awakens, he said, every time we put in Luke, you stop caring about Rey. You stop caring about Finn. You stop caring about all these. You just care about Luke. Right. And one of the things I love about NJO is that I never felt that way. When Luke was there, I'm actually half the time more interested in what's going on with Jacen and Jaina. So, so that's really a testament.
I was a little shocked when I first started a few books of the series. I mean, Luke's in here. He plays a role. He's got his part. He does his thing. But I was a little shocked that he wasn't, I don't want to say involved as much, but he's just not there as much as I would have thought.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah,
but now, like you said, like Jacen, Jaina, Anakin, all these other characters, Kip, Gaynor, Danny Quee. I'm glad she's back in the mix now, because she was very interesting in the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
Corran's popping back in now. He's back from his hiatus. It's great, and you're right. Like, I'm more interested in their story now. But Luke's there. He's serving his purpose. Don't get me wrong.
The cool thing, I get what you're saying, because Luke, his role has evolved.
Yeah.
And he knows that if he dies, I think it's a point that's made in the Jedi Academy Leviathan comic, which if you haven't read it, it's great, where Luke realizes, if I die, that's a bigger blow to the Jedi. I have to stay safe. I can't just throw myself into this and that. I have to stay alive. I'm the leader of the Jedi. I'm a political leader. He's in a Yoda situation where you just can't be reckless anymore. You can't just say, oh, there's a bunch, because that's something, I'm going to try to mince my words here. It's something that I've also been very reacquainted with the other big project I'm working on. It's something that the NJO strikes home. It's not like the Yuuzhan Vong or like battle droids or something that you can just go up and slice them down.
Yeah.
The Yuuzhan Vong, every single Yuuzhan Vong is a mortal threat to you. If you fight someone with an amphistaff and you cannot sense what they're going to do before they swing that thing, you might be dead. Yeah. I mean, it's a very lethal threat to the Jedi. Every single encounter is a lethal threat. And so Jaina brings up this point. It's not a matter of how good you are all the time. Like, if you just stay in there long enough, you will die. Right? It's just a game of odds. And I think Luke realizes he has a couple moments where he goes in, saves the day, especially if his loved ones are in danger. But Luke, he knows that he cannot go in there like as a strike team, lead the strike team. Like, it would just, he would take out a lot of Yuuzhan Vong, but there are a lot more Yuuzhan Vong.
Yeah.
Right? And so you can't just go in and lop off of Palpatine's head and say it's all good. Like, there's just, he knows that the scale is such that the Jedi, his Jedi, are going to have to solve this themselves. And that's hard for him to let go, but he just knows that the galaxy, the chances of victory if he dies are so slim, because he's the only one, maybe with the aside of Vergere, to have that connection to Yoda, to Obi-Wan. He's the last link to the old generation. And if he goes,
that's it.
Then, you just need him to be there as long as he can to make sure. Because, he started Vector Prime. He's grown this Jedi Order to 100 people. That's great. Well, the Yuuzhan Vong like have that number. So, I mean, what about after the war? I mean, if we survive this thing, we're going to have to still rebuild. We need you around. So I think Luke, and he's a father now. That's another whole side to this.
That's
Yeah,
changed the game.
Yeah, there's a moment where he's talking with Mara. I think it's one of the Edge of Victory books where Mara's just really scared about everything, and he's like, "Yeah, I'm scared too."
Yeah, he was open.
It's a pretty tough time to be bringing a kid into this world and trying to survive in this. I imagine it's how some people who have delivered children during World War II or during anything.
Yeah, man, there's so many great moments. I was thinking about the battle with Corrin and Shedao Shai.
Oh man, that for me is when I think back to key battles, top 3 easy. And the cool thing is Salvatore says, or no, excuse me, Stackpole. Stackpole says that that scene was inspired by Episode 1. When he saw that battle between Darth Maul and Obi-Wan, he's like, "All right, we're doing that."
It was good. Like
Yeah.
how he had the saber, and oh man, when he had it and he was holding it to him, and he just waited that split second, so he knew that it was lights out, and then he hit the button. Oh man, that was thrilling.
And you know what? In the documentary that's going to be coming out, Stackpole talks about that, and he talks in depth about that and what that means for Corrin. And it's one of the most interesting conversations I've ever heard from one of the authors. And he talks about, I mean, I won't give it all away, but I'll say that he talks about how he feels like that was a moment where Corrin touched the dark side.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's so interesting to hear him talk about that and just, especially from the creator of Corrin. Stackpole created Corrin. So it's interesting.
Man. Dude, so do I get like a little sneak peek of this thing, man?
That's so funny.
Come on. We're bros.
If you raid my hard drive. But
All
yeah,
right,
I mean, it'll be cool. Let me think here. The hardest challenge for me in terms of editing it is what to leave out.
Yeah.
So it's just because some authors are more forthcoming than others, and Stackpole has given many interviews about many things over the years. But that's something else, by the way, that space battles, star by star, and all these things, incredible things to imagine. These Yuuzhan Vong warships and the Coral Skippers and the other things. And there is only one thing that I wish was there. And I cannot blame NJO for this because it was too early. But in the Black Fleet Crisis books, it's established that there's a new class modernization project. And it introduces ships like the Nebula-class Star Destroyer, which, if you've ever seen it, is a sight to behold. And then it also introduces things like the K-Wings. And the thing is, I love that the E-Wings are an NJO. Awesome EU ship. I love that they're there. But unfortunately, the really great designs, both the K-Wing and the Nebula, they didn't really get great designs in the late 90s when the NJO was being conceived. But in the mid to late 2000s, they had these spectacular designs, which have now everybody's accepted that these are the designs. And it's the one thing is like I wish that if the timing had worked out, that we get more mentions of the Nebula and the K-Wing and what they're doing. We know that they fought. We just don't have it on page.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't read the Black Fleet Crisis yet. You've mentioned that a few times. You like that series, eh?
It's just one I remember. Although I think I remember things that maybe people don't focus on so much. I remember Luke's story. A lot of that book is trilogy. Luke is trying to find out about his mother, and then I do remember the K-Wings. It's kind of a meme at this point, the power of the K-Wings, but it's so fun. I mean, that's one of the cool things about the EU. Pulling, K-Wings are created by Cube McDowell, I guess is how you say his name. And then you got E-Wings by Cam Kennedy, Tom Beach. And you have all this stuff from all these people, and it all in NJO. I mean, I know K-Wings aren't mentioned, but E-Wings are there, and all the Clawcraft are there, and everything from so many different authors, so many different heads going into this thing to make it. I just love that. It's just a really cool thing that it really makes the universe feel lived in.
Yeah, more real.
Yeah. It's really, really cool.
Yeah, the space battles in Star by Star are phenomenal. Like I said, he does a great job. Just the description and in the interaction and how it all. Sometimes I'll be honest, I get, depending on the author, I get a little lost with what's going on
Yeah,
in the
same.
space battles.
Mhm.
You know, I'll be honest. And then there's other authors that just they nail it. They make it so you can really see it, and they describe it in a way that it almost seems complex, but it's very simple.
Right. You're right. And Luceno said that was the hardest part about having to write in Star Wars, was learning how to do the space battles and trying to pay
Yeah.
attention to what everybody else was doing. I will say, I think he does mention this in the documentary, but even though that was the challenge for him, he felt that when he was writing Agents of Chaos, in a way, he felt like he was writing when Han was grieving. He's felt there was some inspiration from writing about Brian Daley, who was his friend who had died, who had written the first Han Solo trilogy. So there's almost a sense of kinship there. But
Yeah.
I know he mentioned for that series that the duology space battles are tricky to write, and you have to look to what do other people do, and it's probably one of the reasons Aaron Alston was brought on later on to help write for the series, because he was so popular with the X-Wing books. So something I wanted to quick mention is that the series builds so much on the hand of Thrawn, which I don't know. Have you read the Thrawn duology?
I have not.
Okay.
Unfortunately.
Well, yeah, I think that was the most recent infographic that I put out about George and his interactions with. And we haven't talked very much about George, but his interactions with Hand of Thrawn, which I don't think most people know that he was involved in that. He was. But yeah, I mean, the cool thing is, George is behind the marriage, Luke and Mara. I mean, it's George Penn that signs it. So, I mean, if other people, even if George changed his mind later on, that's there. But I wouldn't be surprised. I do not have an inside ear into Lucasfilm, but I wouldn't be surprised that when the outline crossed his desk for Hand of Thrawn in 1994, I'm sure George was pleased to see that the war with the Empire was coming to an end, because that was one of the things that George said to the NJO guys. Sith and Empire, we've done it. So let's do something else. And that I think glad they listened.
Yeah. So far I'm on board with. It's so damn good.
And I love that the Empire is actually there. They're in their quarter of the galaxy, and they try to pitch in for this battle. But yeah.
You mentioned George, right?
Yeah.
I called him the other day. No, I didn't.
That's great. The
but have you ever seen this?
Oh no, I don't. I have not seen that. That's incredible.
It's a Scholastic book from 2013. I read it this morning. It's actually phenomenal. It's a story of his life.
And his life is very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. I read it this morning when I was drinking coffee. It's like 100 and some pages, but it has, okay, I don't know if you know this or other people know this, but actually George was drafted to go to Vietnam.
I didn't know that.
But he had, through his physical, he tested positive for diabetes. So,
right. Yeah.
Yeah, I did not know that. So I'm going to throw out a couple. There's like in the back of it, there's 10 things that you should know about George. There's graphics in here, and it's got like film notes. I know I'm doing a terrible job with my. Need to get a camera.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah, goodwill.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think people who are more interested in that, I think it's a book. I don't know if it's not printed anymore, but you can probably find it on eBay. These old books, the annotated screenplays. So those are just the screenplays of the originals with George's like handwritten notes in the corner.
Yeah.
But it's pretty cool. And speaking of George, I will be the infographic series, I kind of paused it for a moment because I was waiting for the release of the new Jedi Order panel from LegendsCon. But I think I'm probably just going to go ahead anyway because I've heard from some people that George wasn't really brought up very much. So if that's the case, I will be making the George and NJO infographics soon. That's been in my mind, obviously, since this day I started working on these. And then after that, I'm probably going to, I'm going to continue with the timeline, but a lot of my attention these days is George and the video games, his interaction with the video games, which he was all over that. He loved being part of the video games. And there's so many funny stories. I can't even tell you. I don't know if I told you the story about, I don't know if I ever told you about the story with him with Dark Forces. Did I ever say that to you before?
No, I don't believe so.
Oh, man. Well, if I didn't mention it, it's just so funny. So this will be in there, but 1994, I think it's 94, Dark Forces releases video game. And George is in Florida or something too. He's like some television broadcast where George is actually going to sit down and play this game. And John Knoll, or maybe it's John Knowles. There's actually two people, John Knoll and John Knowles. But I think John Knowles, he's the one who was working on that game. And he was excited to hear what George thought because George actually was involved in Dark Forces. George helped design the Dark Trooper. Pretty big thing. Yeah, it's crazy. But George helped design that. And so Dark Forces is there. And, of course, John Knowles ends up being kind of like shattered. He's so disappointed because George starts to play it. And George's first reaction is, this is so violent. I mean, you're just blowing stormtroopers' heads off. What the heck? I mean, and so he's kind of, I was like, oh, man, we worked so hard on this game. And George just, is so disappointed. Well, he shows George how to play it. George gives that reaction. And then the cameras start to roll. Interview starts. And then they give him the controller and he starts to play. And the funny thing is, during the course of the interview and during the course of this, George's early response is, oh, man, it's so bad. Well, it kind of slowly transitions to George. He's like jumping over ravines and shooting stormtroopers and taking them down. George starts to kind of get into it. And I just thought that was the perfect duality of George Lucas right there. Is the man who on the one hand is going to say, no, this is too violent.
Too much.
This is wrong, ethically wrong. And then on the other hand, the guy is like, yeah, take that. And you find that split in Star Wars. It's this interesting mix.
That's cool.
Where we have fun with the space battles where we're blowing up people, but then we get this strong moment in the Death Star chamber where Luke doesn't want to kill his father. I mean, you have this. I don't know. It's an interesting mix, but that's pure George. So it's a funny little moment from Dark Forces.
Yeah, that's cool. Be interested to see all that.
Yeah, it's funny, but
yeah, I wanted to share that with you because I know you like doing. But
yeah, I mean that sounds like a great book. George went through a lot. I mean, he got into that car accident, which just changed his life forever. Yeah, and he says that every day after that, he thought he was an extra day. So that was something that. When I look at Star Wars, it's something that's not, in my opinion, just my opinion. I don't think it's present in the current television. I don't think it's much present in the films, but I don't find that surprising. I only see it in George's movies, really. There's a sense of velocity in his movies, a sense of speed. And I really mean that straightforwardly, like he puts you in the cockpit and you go fast.
Yeah.
And he does that in all the movies. There's always like a race sequence in Star Wars. And that's something that I think is just straight from George being a race car pilot. It's just him loving speed, loving the sense of velocity, and having a feel for what that actually looks like because he's been there.
Yeah. So he grew up in that era where like the streetcars and the greasers and like that was his thing, and the music, how music was a big influence.
Yeah. So like the pod race is like for him 100% pure George Lucas, the pod race.
Yep.
And if George isn't making Phantom Menace, we don't get the pod race. In fact, one of the reasons I love the Phantom Menace is that if George doesn't make the prequels, if somebody else makes those, I don't think the Phantom Menace even exists because it's such an interesting idea. I mean, the whole concept of that movie is I mean, there's a couple of concepts. One of the concepts is everything in Phantom Menace comes in twos: Master and Apprentice, Padme and the Queen, Qui-Gon. Like there's this whole thing of twos, and the cool thing is it's twos all the way down. The Gungans and the humans, it's all the way down until you get to Anakin. It's just Anakin, but then what's the other one? And of course, that's the poster. The shadow is Darth Vader, and so I love that idea that he's playing with the fact that we know who Anakin is, and so we're going to fill in the last piece to ourselves. But one of the things that I think is so cool about that movie is all about how, and this is so true if you're a history nut or if you just love learning about the world, that big events, huge things in the world often start from very inauspicious beginnings. Things that nobody would look at, things where people say, is this really where it started? Like how could it have started with something so small? And so the irrelevant characters, as Obi-Wan would say, pathetic life forms, people like Jar Jar, people like Anakin, they end up being the key. And who would think that everything that culminates in Return of the Jedi starts from a trade dispute with Naboo and Trade Federation? I mean, the idea that it all starts from like, this is the moment. That's such a cool thing, because if you look throughout history, that's what you'll find is like often the hugest events have the tiniest little moment where they start. And that's really cool, in my opinion.
Yeah. What's funny is I'm actually listening to the audiobook, and when I go to work and come home in my car, like I got the cassette, unabridged Phantom Menace.
So of the Phantom Menace.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Cassette, mind you, cassette, people. Okay.
That's really cool. Yeah.
So my car still has a cassette player.
You've gone retro now, but it's there's a funny little thing too about that. I think Terry Brooks, right? Didn't he do?
Yeah, Terry Brooks.
Yeah. There's a funny line where George actually called Salvatore to ask him to do Attack of the Clones. And which means, by the way, that George must have read samples of Vector Prime. Must have. But so he's chosen, but Salvatore's like, I don't know, I want to do Star Wars again. They try to rip my head off for this Chewie thing, so I don't know if I want to. And apparently he's talking with Terry Brooks, and he mentions that. Terry's like, are you nuts? And I guess that convinced Salvatore to do it.
Yeah.
It's pretty funny.
Well, Attack of the Clones was really good too, the novelization. Yeah. I thought it was it was good, but yeah, you mentioned that he got a lot of crap for what he did to Chewie.
I'll tell you something interesting about that, by the way, the Phantom Menace, since you're listening to it. When George met with Terry to talk about making that novel, George was initially interested in having the whole book be from Anakin's perspective. From top to bottom, it'd be like a first person type of story, like iJedi or Shatterpoint journals. Like it's all from Anakin's perspective. And that's what George was thinking. I think eventually they went away from that because you can't include most of the movie if that happens.
Yeah, that's true.
But that's what George wanted. And he kind of wanted the same thing again for Attack of the Clones. He was always saying to Salvatore, I want you to do Padme's story. Do more of Padme. Do more of Shmi. All that. So, George had specific ideas that he wanted for the novelizations. Things that he had in mind for them.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, my friend. Oh, man, we talked about a lot of good stuff.
Yeah, we
so
did.
Far. Oh, I could keep going on George too, but I'd like to save that for another time. I was going to say, you got anything in the pipe, but you made the big announcement on this amazing documentary you're putting together for us. Which
that should be fun.
You can just put that link to it in my email after this. But man, I always enjoy talking to you.
Yeah, it's a great conversation. I appreciate you having me on. It's always fun.
Yeah. And stay tuned, because I'll have something coming up soon that'll be exciting for all you guys as well, especially you. So
awesome.
Yeah, I'm gonna be mysterious. Xezene. I'm learning it from you here.
All right.
But well, thanks again for coming on, everyone. I hope that you enjoyed this conversation. I'll put some links in the description so you can check out some of the amazing, incredible things he put together for us. And I won't give any spoilers too. I'll review this documentary for you all, so I'll get a little peak of it. But that's it, folks. And until next time, see you guys soon.